All right, friends, brace yourselves. In case any of you out there have any doubts whatsoever that Donald Trump and his supporters plan to execute a blatantly fascist agenda if he wins the 2024 election, look no further than this. A guy who is reportedly on Trump's shortlist to be the next attorney general is publicly threatening to indict, detain, denaturalize, and deport, that's a direct quote, a popular progressive commentator, Mehdi Hasan, because this guy did not like a recent segment that Mehdi Hasan did about him. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks. Again, this is becoming a recurring theme of the channel, unapologetically so. Donald Trump is objectively a fascist, period. Anyone who says otherwise is at least one of three things: an idiot, a liar, or ignorant. And we're doing our part in our own small way to try to address the third group, people who are ignorant, by spreading the word. And Donald Trump, to his credit, is finding new and elaborate ways to broadcast his fascism to everyone. He is not hiding it. And this is just a very strange wrinkle that just goes to show how bold the Republican Party has become, that they feel like they can just crawl out of the shadows and say things that they should never be allowed to say without severe political consequences. I want to play a clip just to give you an idea of who Mike Davis is. This is one of the segments that Mehdi Hasan did about him, and we'll unpack it all together.
Now let's move on to a man a lot of people may not have heard of yet, Mike Davis. He's the man many in Trump's inner circle, including his own son Don Jr. and Steve Bannon, are pitching to be the country's next possible attorney general. Earlier this week, over on my Peacock show, I dove deep into the conservative lawyer's record, from Davis's threats to send journalists to the DC gulag to his repeated calls on social media for his followers to, quote, arm up against the violent black underclass. And it appears I may have struck a nerve. Davis has since responded to my monologue from earlier this week, pledging to indict me when he's AG. For what, I'm not sure, but he's also threatened to send me to the DC gulag. That's a totally normal, non-fascistic response from a man eyeing to become the nation's chief law enforcement officer, right?
It's absolutely insane. We're not going to play the whole clip, but here's the situation. I want to do a quick deep dive. This is from the Philadelphia Inquirer, just to give you some context into who Mike Davis is, because this guy's like Two-Face. Like, he is a comic book villain. He's got this one relatively sanitized public front, and then he has the deranged MAGA cultist aspect to him. He's like, I don't know, he's like a Sith Lord, right? He's got the public persona, and then he's got the true dark side persona. So we're not going to read the whole thing, but again, this is where Mike Davis comes in. Most folks, except for the politically obsessed, have never heard of Davis, but it's time for people to learn. The mid-40s-ish Davis takes the abstract warnings that the U.S. democracy is on the line in 2024 election and brings them to life. And again, it goes into the Mehdi Hasan thing. Actually, there are two Mike Davises. The first you might call Resume Mike Davis, with the Des Moines, Iowa native hitting all the right marks for rapid advancement in today's conservative legal movement. He's a member of the Federalist Society. Davis worked as a consultant to boost the confirmation of Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, who was Donald Trump's first Supreme Court Justice, confirmed, I might add, then became chief counsel for nominations to the GOP chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, fellow Iowan Chuck Grassley. He served Grassley during the contentious hearings over eventual Justice Brett Kavanaugh and the push by Trump and then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to pack the judiciary with right-wing judges. He now heads two ultra-conservative efforts, the Article 3 Project and the Internet Accountability Project. On paper, it wouldn't be a stretch for a Republican president to give someone like Davis a top post. But the attorney's resume doesn't tell you about the other Mike Davis, now a verbal pit bull for Trump and his MAGA movement, making increasingly outrageous statements seemingly aimed at getting the attention of the boss and his inner circle. And so, again, we're not going to read the whole thing, but he joked, perhaps, that the new president would have to grant him a pardon after he left town, D.C., after what Davis described as a reign of terror during which he would unleash hell on Washington, D.C., okay? He's participating in the Project 2025 blueprint. He says we're going to deport a lot of people, 10 million people, and growing anchor babies, their parents, their grandparents. Davis added, we're going to put kids in cages. It's going to be glorious. We're going to detain a lot of people in the D.C. gulag and Gitmo. Now, is he joking? Is he not joking? Again, as we've discussed before, whether you like it or not, the MAGA movement is not entitled to anyone's suspension of disbelief or benefit of the doubt. They are not. This movement has become an incendiary, fascistic, authoritarian movement, and we have no reason to believe that he's joking. And even if he were joking, if anyone else had said this 10 years ago, Or if a Democrat said it now about Republicans or a Republican constituency, half the country would want to secede from the Union. We can't operate on double standards. You and I have to fight against that. So no matter what, the fact that these words have left this man's mouth is disgusting. It's despicable, and he should suffer enormous reputational and political consequences as a result. He should be politically toxic for any administration. And yet, we show no signs of it. Don Jr., Donald Trump's son, has publicly endorsed him as well. I can't imagine that he would not, get the attention of Donald Trump if he hasn't already, and this would be the way to do it. He says, "Dear President Trump, here's my application to serve as your next Attorney General. If you pick me, I promise to put Mehdi Hasan on list 2, 4, and 6. I didn't know what the hell list 2, 4, and 6 meant, but then he was graciously in a position to clarify later. Laughing emoji, Trump's dream team. Mehdi Hasan is now on my list 2, indict, 4, detain, 6, denaturalize, and 3, deport. I already have his spot picked out in the D.C. gulag, but I'll put him in the woman's cell block with Tim ODC, which is Tim Miller, a former Republican strategist who now helps run the Bulwark, so these whiny leftists don't get beat up as often." And again, Mehdi Hasan pointed out, "Nothing to see here, just the former Gorsuch law clerk touted as Trump's next attorney general, threatening to indict, detain, and deport me. For what? And put Tim Miller, who is gay, in a women's prison. Nothing at all unconstitutional, fascistic, or bigoted about any of this." Folks, this isn't hyperbole. It's not funny. It's something which should be ruthlessly attacked politically, reputationally, in terms of public relations. This should be widely condemned. And every time a Republican politician or a conservative commentator wants to talk about the 2024 election or wants to either publicly endorse Donald Trump or at least even make room for a Trump presidency, they should be forced to answer questions about Mike Davis. Do you support what Mike Davis has to say? If not, will you explicitly, ruthlessly condemn it in the strongest possible terms? And of course they won't, because Republican elected politicians and most conservative commentators are cowards in that respect, even though they would never tolerate anything like that coming from the mouth of a Democrat, a progressive, a leftist, nor should they, by the way. But the double standards are thick, and we run the risk, as we've talked about before, of just baking it into the price of admission that this is just who Donald Trump is, this is just what the Republican Party's become, this is the new normal, and we just have to deal with it. Hell no. This should be a 50-state, coast-to-coast repudiation of what the Republican Party has become. And we have a year to try to make that happen, to try to encourage it. But it's going to be a tall order. And last thing I'll say is I'll just remind you of an article that we covered, talking with Trump supporters, people involved in this movement who are very explicitly saying that Donald Trump has an agenda of revenge in mind if he is elected president again. He intends to have fewer safeguards, fewer restraints, fewer opportunities for people to push back on him. He wants to hoard executive power unto himself. He's even talked about potentially running for an unconstitutional third term. And you think, well, how the hell could that happen? That's unconstitutional. And yet, the Supreme Court currently has a 6-3 conservative supermajority, with 3 of them, half of that conservative supermajority, having been appointed and confirmed by Donald Trump himself. We have to take this seriously. There's no margin for error. We shouldn't just go, whatever. There is no rational basis to downplay this or to pretend that this is the new normal, or that there's any counterweight to this. That's the other thing. On the Democratic side, it's just simply a fact. The very worst elected Democrat is morally, intellectually, democratically superior to the very best elected Republican. The only good elected Republican official is one who openly condemns his or her party. That's it. If you want to be conservative, fair enough. That's a perfectly fair ideology. This is not and should not be conservative. This is just fascistic, right? I thought conservatives want small government, minimal government. I thought that they want to maximize, liberty, right? And have, no overarching authoritarian movement. It sounds like the modern Republican Party is increasingly authoritarian. They actually want big government. They want massive government. They want omnipresent government, just as long as that government does what they want. So this is super gross. It's absolutely, this should be wall-to-wall coverage, just like everything that Trump has been saying lately. This is infinitely more important than what shoes the M&M wears, or, you know, the latest culture war about gas stoves and, you know, woke this or woke that. We have to take this seriously. You and I, we have to spread the word, because we got a year to avert a crisis like this. And we have absolutely no reason whatsoever to downplay it or to give the Republican Party the benefit of the doubt. And we actually have every reason to do the opposite. Let me know what you think in the comments.